ascribe that to the racism of whites and Europeans, is this not sowing a huge amount of future landmines in society?
I think many of these biological differences, as you talk about them in sport, are real, but people do not infer from this that there might be IQ differences. On the contrary, it has been argued that if blacks are stronger and more endurant in certain areas, it has nothing to do with IQ. But they are separate questions. You might have an African 100-meter sprinter who is highly intelligent, and you might have one who is very dumb. So we should always keep in mind that the biological factors might be behind it all, but it manifests itself in different forms in sport. While I was young, I was traveling and I was competing in kayak, and I actually won the bronze medal at the Olympiad in 1960. And then it occurred to me, I have never seen a black kayak paddler. I have seen a few Asians, because their upper body is just about the same size of the Europeans. It's only their legs that are shorter. So they could do well in kayak. So I've seen a few Asians, but none that really could threaten the final winners. So there are some immense differences in the sports biology. I mean, you and I would never put our faces up in a 100-meter final at the Olympiad, because we would make a laughing stock. But then again, if we were given some intellectual problems, we might be able to compete again. So there is a growing awareness that there are some differences, but the full consequences are not realized.
The data that seems to be coming out of our capacity to peer inside the brain, using CAT scans and other forms of medical technology, where is the science relative to the measuring? Because of course everyone's measuring and has for the last 100 years or so. As you mentioned, 40,000 plus people have been tested across the world to create some either direct or approximate measures of national IQ. Where is the physical science in its exploration of the potential biological substrata of IQ and intelligence as a whole?
Last year I attended a conference in the States, and there I was told by one of the leading researchers of brain scanning that he first showed some nice pictures and said, now we are giving this person some tasks, some intellectual tasks. And look, these areas are active. And he showed a lot of pictures, and I was deeply impressed. And then he turned speed and said, well, now I will show you this brain. It is doing exactly the same task as the one you saw before, but the picture is very different. And now it was the same person who was studied 1 week later. This shows that the brain is such a versatile thing that even the same substrates in one person differ from one task to another, and even between similar tasks.
You've also pointed out that, and I found this a little tough to follow because of my lack of expertise in the medicine, but the glucose consumption seems to decrease the smarter that you are, which it would seem to me like, you know, if your muscles are stronger, then they're going to burn more calories, more energy, but this doesn't seem to be the case with the brain.
If you take the resting potential of glucose uptake in a demented person and in a high IQ person, you will see that the demented person's brain is working like lightning all the time. But the resting high IQ person has a brain that really is relaxing. But now if you load those two people with some cognitive task, the demented person's brain continue to work at high speed and apparently have difficulties trying to figure out what is going on, while the high IQ person's glucose uptake is greatly increased. So there's much more flexibility in high IQ brains than in low IQ brains.
Right. The American Anthropological Society, this is some time back, I don't know if they've revised this, but have put out, as a lot of the social sciences have put out, the argument that race is just a social construct. There are sort of superficial differences in appearance and skin color, but the brain is photocopied across the globe despite differences in environment and evolution. I wonder if you could help people to understand the degree of information that seems to be withheld from everyone about some of the differences in race. Everything from the twinning to brain size to secondary sexual characteristics. It seems like there's quite a lot. You know, again, we're all human, but it seems like there are quite a lot of differences that are kind of withheld that make statements like race is a social construct sort of incomprehensible, at least to me.
Yes, I think I will take you back to while we a short while ago talked about the exodus from Africa, and then people walked through still colder areas of and then their selective conditions changed, so they only were selected for a higher brain, a larger brain, and a more intelligent brain. This has actually made me, in a publication I published last year, suggest that we are not as talking so much about race differences, but about geoclimatic types. So there are some icy people up north with big brains and altruism, and there are some smaller brains in Africa with more sunny people. So the race is actually a rough categorization of this long selection process when we had exodus from Africa some 50 to 200,000 years ago. And that means that we are climatic types rather than race types. So I would like to free the race discussion from these bad connotations. Some people cannot even endure hearing the word race, then they begin to frown. And I think if you talk about geoclimatic differences that are related to brain size and to longitude, to the degree to which people have walked up towards the high north, then we might have a more relaxed discussion. And then it becomes more data related, which I always prefer.
Yeah, and the analogy that I've used is that when we look at brown bears versus polar bears, white-haired bears versus brown-haired bears, we recognize that as a function of the environment. And we would talk really about the effects of the environment, you know, why people have paler skin, as far as I understand it, is something to do with less vitamin D absorption, particularly in winter, vitamin D being necessary to avoid rickets and other problems. So I think that's a great way of putting it, that we're really looking at the effects of climate on a species rather than some a priori racial division.
Yes, and I think it will be a more easy way for people to understand.
Yeah, I think that's very helpful. I will totally steal that from you with due credit.
You're welcome to do that.
So what are some of the biological differences that people generally aren't aware of that have, I guess, arisen as a result of these environmental differences?
I think the size of the brain correlates moderately with intelligence, about 0.45 when you do a good scanning. And we also have differences in hormones. It seems that blacks have slightly higher levels of the male hormone testosterone and than Europeans has, and even the Northeast Asians have the lowest level. Testicular size is also something that differs between people, but you're never allowed to talk about that. And the size is not really, we don't know the importance of that. But testosterone has a lot of effects on libido, sexual appetite. It has a lot of effects on our well-being. And if it goes low, then a man, of course, become impotent, and that's a problem in itself. If he has too much, then he might go out of control. He might be too aggressive, and even if he has some ego strength, he might not be able to control himself. So in females, we have variations also in testosterone, but also in estrogen. And estrogen is very important for female reproductive functions, It's what creates what males consider beautiful curves and so on. So there are a lot of biological differences. And now comes this whole business of DNA typing, which is immensely interesting. And we learn by the day of new traces that people took in prehistoric times and so on. And we can begin to foresee individual differences in all respects for example, intelligence. There's this DUF 1220 domain that seems to correlate with intelligence, not only among species, but also within humans. And those who have a lot of copy repeats of this DUF 1220 domain on the chromosome, they are more intelligent than those who have fewer of it. It's all so fascinating, and it's actually time-consuming to try to keep a track of these developments.
I wonder if we could dip into gender as well, because I really don't want to leave any group unoffended in this conversation. But to dip into gender, now, what I had understood with regards to gender, and I get a lot of this from Charles Murray's book on human achievement, is that the bell curve is more narrow for women. In other words, they're more clustered around the mean. And this explains why there are more male super geniuses and more male super idiots, like why there are more men at the very highest level of intellectual achievement and homeless men who can't seem to put barely one foot in front of the other. But I've also heard that there may in fact be differences even in the mean between men and women, but I haven't seen that explicated too clearly. Is that anything you can speak to help clarify?
In 2005, I published sex difference somewhere between 3 and 8 IQ points. And then I was sacked by the university and rehired and so on. So they said it was a completely worthless study because everybody knew that females and males have the same average IQ. So I have taken revenge last year. Then I studied I had IQ data representing 15 million Americans between 8 and 17 years of age. And then I said, well, perhaps there will be a sex difference in there. And it was of exactly the same size as my small sample. So I'm going to present this paper to my university in a brief time. But the point is that there is not only an average difference, about 3 to 7 IQ points, and it differs a little bit from one race to another. I had whites, blacks, and Hispanics in this group. But the dispersion or the curve was more flat for the males than for the females, which means that there are more really low IQ men than women. But there are also more really high IQ men than women. And if you go up to IQ 145, there will be about 8 males for each female. And if now you assume that Nobel Prizes are taken by people who have at least IQ 145, then you might explain the rarity of females earning Nobel Prizes and field medals in mathematics and so on. But I'm not expecting many people are hailing me for the good for this paper, so I'll wait and see.
But this is the frustrating thing for me. You've been at this game a lot longer than I have, so I may not be